Good evening, everybody. I hope you can see me okay. So, as you know, this is our Tuesday night Dharma gathering, and if you're joining in, would you please open a second window in your browser and go to facebook.com/davidnickturn, and then that's where you will see the link to communicating along with us here. So also remember, as what happened with somebody last week, you have to refresh that window in your browser periodically to see the new comments. Okay, so if you would, please enter and sign in, let me know you're out there. You'll see where the comments are. Okay, there we go. We're starting to see some folks showing up. So we have, if you're looking, you'll see the list of people who are showing up. And we have Christy Kravitsky from Brooklyn. I wonder how Brooklyn got that kind of reputation. Brooklyn used to have the feeling of being the kind of salty aspect of New York, and I think now it's the sort of trendy. Brooklyn's really changed. Rebecca is there. Maya is there from sunny Toronto. I don't think it's sort of sundown here, although it was a beautiful day in New York today. So again, if you're just tuning in, please open a second window in your browser. Go to facebook.com/davidnickturn. There you also see a link to all the comments on one page at the top. Or you can just keep refreshing this window and you'll hang with us. So if some of you could write in just a few more just to let me know that you're here and hearing me okay and seeing okay, and then we'll get underway with our program, our topic for this evening. Okay, so I think people are still signing in and on, so I'll keep mentioning that several times as we go. We have Beth is there, Ariane is there, sunny and still hot in Scottsdale. Kathleen Sullivan is there from chilly Massachusetts. Leaves turning here, quite pretty. I'll be coming up there in several weeks, Kathleen, to Metro West Yoga and Kripalu. So we'll be spending quite a bit of time in your state in October. Darcy is there from Nova Scotia. Hi, Darcy. Haven't seen you for a while. David Smith from Muggy, North California. Dan Crampton from Kalamazoo. Can see, excuse me, and hear you fine. All right, so I'm getting the idea that this is working, and we should see if a bunch more people have signed on. So let's get underway. We'll begin our talk. Good evening, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Tuesday night Dharma gathering. Tonight's topic is the protector principle, especially as it manifests in Tibetan Buddhism and its offshoots, but in general, the notion of protection is going to be explored tonight. One of the reasons is this weekend I was in the Rocky Mountains with Krishnadas, playing at the Yoga Journal at Estes Park, Colorado. And to my surprise, Joe Bundy, who maybe will show up at some point here tonight, he often does, came and said hello, and he had made the drive from Wyoming to come to the concert, not knowing that I was there actually. And so I asked Joe, what should we talk about tonight? And he mentioned that he had been at Shambhala at Karmachuling for a 2-week retreat this summer, and he's been studying for quite a while and practicing, but that they introduced the practice of chanting at the center where he was doing the practice. Hadn't really been exposed to that before, and he said, what are those chants that are going on there? So I had already, I think, been thinking about the notion of protection, like what energies in our environment sort of lean in to help us stay awake, literally and sort of more metaphysically. And then on the way to the airport, Mark Gorman, who was the bass player in KD's band, and I had a 2-hour layover, and we had a nice, good, long, deep chat. And Mark, when I mentioned this idea of the protector principle, and also the whole idea of tuning into lineage energy, gurus, a lot of the people there were tuned into Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaji, talked about connecting with him in various ways, even though he's obviously no longer physically alive in the body. So we swapped a couple of stories, and Mark's story was a very simple one in a way. He said he had been driving his car on way back from a gig late at night and put it on cruise control, and then he was exhausted, so he nodded out, and somehow actually stayed on the road, which is part of the interesting dimension of it. And in addition to that, he jerked awake and looked up, and was about 20 feet in front of him was an oil rig, an oil truck, and he would have plowed into it if he had stayed awake probably even more, 2 or 3 more seconds. That would have been the end of our friend Mark. So, it wasn't as if somebody spoke to him and said, wake up, or any of that kind of thing, but just the fact that he jerked into a wake situation then, of course, could be taken a lot of different ways, so we just explored that experience a little bit. So I see more of you have signed on, so before we really launch fully into the topic, I want to invite you to open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/DavidNickTurn, and let us know you're around. And then that'll be your way of participating with Q&A and discussions as we go forward. I see Lama Kunga's there. Good to see you. Neely Ray, Mary Jo Stewart from Bainbridge Island, Washington. Okay, so we've got a lot of the usual suspects, as we would say. So, the protection principle, protector principle, whichever you want to call it, to really get into this topic properly, we need to know where we are in terms of our view of the world and how it operates. And the view that we're going to be looking at tonight really is, to contemplate it, not a native view in terms of most of those of us who grow up in the West. Although you could say there is equivalent in certain Western spiritual and religious traditions that we'll look at a little bit. But in particular, we're going to be looking tonight at the Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism approach, which of course most of us studied through its Tibetan Buddhist extension. Of course, it originated in India and then therefore goes back to the pre-existing traditions, and we would have to look at maybe how Hindu people would look at this thing. And then also you could look at it as any kind of native spirituality, shamanistic, the native Bun tradition of Tibet. So the idea that I wanted to introduce first, that we're going to have to kind of open our minds a little bit and expand our sense of what's around us. What kind of world are we living in? And the view here is really what we would call a polytheistic or pantheistic tradition, in which the notion of energies is not concentrated just into a single sense of divinity or deity. And that's something that was a big topic for Trungpa Rinpoche when he taught, was the recognition of, and in fact, the reintroduction, I would have to say, for most of us who come from a monotheistic tradition into a pantheistic worldview, which is that there's all kinds of energies around us that are representing many different levels and aspects of the world which we inhabit. And we're an integral part of that. It's not like they're separate from us in the sense of being external in a purely dualistic sense. They're part of the rich environment in which human life goes on. So this is also connected to what we call in the Shambhala tradition, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Drala principle. Dralas are also energetic entities that occupy the world, and particularly the natural world and the human world, and that we can connect with in different ways by how we conduct ourselves and how we live our life. So what's interesting is that to even explore this, we have to kind of look beyond any habitual mental framework that we might have about this, and just at least be curious, about possibilities. But having said that, if you grew up in Bhutan or Tibet or Nepal or any traditional Buddhist culture, the notion of these entities, these protectors, these deities, is so organic that would be like basically baseball would be to us. I drove to City Stadium here in Queens to see the Mets play last weekend. This space opened up, this baseball field, and all these beings dressed in caps, and for us that's like, oh yeah, I'm at a baseball game. So if you grew up in a Tibetan culture, it'd be like, oh yeah, there's Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, and there's Mahakala. First of all, the representations are everywhere of these beings, like statues, rupas, and paintings. So you would have seen them all over the place. But you would have a sense that your world was animated by, occupied by, shared with a whole pantheon of deities. Perhaps in a similar way that a monotheistic person in the Jewish or Christian tradition might think of Christ as being a very real kind of energy or entity, or some aspect of God being present. So all of these are considered to be dimensions of the present environment which our own being resides, right? So, of course, many of us were raised with a very scientific religion, and I think it's kind of, at this point, it's almost fair to call it a religion because our worldview is so colored by it. It's sort of probably posing as the anti-religion, but if there's any belief system about what is out there, what is not out there, how things are structured, then of course, that becomes our worldview. So I just wanted to make that point, that we're talking about a worldview that is, in a sense, an import for most of us, certainly for me personally, and probably not one I would have explored all that much, to be honest, if it hadn't been for working with a particular teacher from a particular lineage. And it's quite possible also I wouldn't have explored that lineage of Buddhism that much if I hadn't met Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. So it's through the offices of an individual teacher, individual being, that even this kind of worldview becomes open. And he spent a lot of time and energy translating this worldview into language that we could relate to and experiences that we could relate to. So I want to make it clear, I'm not really presenting any kind of belief system here or dogma particularly, but just a way of looking at and experiencing reality that is organic in certain parts of the world and either will or will not become organic in the West. there's some sort of a good argument you can make that it's on its way towards becoming more ordinary point of view for a lot of people. So I see quite a few new people have come on. So before we get really deep into the topic, having introduced it, I want to invite you, if you just got getting with us, to open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn, and you'll see this, and refresh that screen every once in a while, and you'll see the scroll of comments. And within a certain amount of time, as usual, this is a juicy topic, we'll get into a discussion, questions and answers, hear what you all have to say about these. So I see there's some new folks. Sammy Brown Goodrich, hello. Melissa Collard from Sacramento, great, hi Melissa. Priya Vajrani from Chile, New York. Donna Morris from South Carolina. Mark Kochesney from New Hampshire. So this is quite an array of people from all over the place. A lot of you are familiar to this gathering, and if you're not, I welcome you for the first time, and just tell you that we do this not every Tuesday night, but most Tuesday nights, and that these talks are all archived. So if you miss any part of tonight, or want to listen to any of the earlier talks, you'll have the opportunity to do that. So, coming back, and after having sort of touched on the notion of polytheism, or a kind of multiple array of levels of being that are not separate from us, that are part of our total, our larger scale, multidimensional reality. And what is, in particular, just to frame it even a little bit more, there are in these in this pantheon of deities, once we go into the polytheistic view of the world, there are a large assortment of them. They may occupy different places. They relate to the human world. Their role in the cosmic situation is to be an interface, you could say, between the human situation, which with our daily storyline unfolding, and a sort of broader or more universal, you could say, cosmic level of existence. So they're sort of in between those two realities. So we can communicate with them, they can communicate with us. Probably in other traditions, there's the notion of angels. In the Christian tradition, helpers. There are many variations on this theme. But in the Buddhist world, they're considered to be two sort of main types of these deities, and one type is peaceful, or you could say obviously benevolent in terms of the quality of love and compassion and tenderness and care. So, an example of that would be Tara. A lot of Buddhists relate to Tara, and there's a couple of different kinds of Tara. And Tara is like the mother Buddha. There's a notion of nurturing and kind of gentleness and peacefulness that's associated, that we can identify our whole world as being sort of colored by that energy, and it can be quite sort of specific, and it's considered in the feminine dimension, feminine aspect, the mother aspect. And there are many others that would be considered peaceful emanations. And then the other part is the wrathful deities, which are, and we have to make this point very clear, in the Buddhist tradition, they're not considered evil or dark. They're also considered to be emanations of enlightenment. And in fact, for example, we have the Mahakala, which is the sort of more representing the kind of wrathful aspect of wakefulness, just the penetrating quality of it, the insistent quality of it, the like, if you're not getting the message quality of it, how do I, if I'm talking to you and you're not getting the message at a certain point, let's say you're driving towards a truck and you're not awake, and then the peaceful quality, hey, look ahead, you need to slow down a little bit. But as you get closer and closer to the truck, in the analogy, the wrathful energy becomes, wake up! You've got to wake up. So it's considered a direct expression of the benevolent quality of the world, but expressed in this kind of urgent or more direct or more penetrating quality. So that's a very important point. You look at the depictions of these deities, and they might be sort of black or blue, and they might be holding kind of, sort of warrior-like ornaments, and they're often wearing like a garland of skulls and things like that. So they're kind of fierce or fearsome, but really what they represent is the kind of ruthless quality of compassion. So that we need to be very clear about that in the Vajrayana tradition. Even the wrathful deities are considered emanations of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So I'll bring into a point there that came up on the cab ride on the way home. Once we get into these topics, they just seem to ripple and roll through my life. It's pretty synchronous, So, are they real? This would be like, of course, somebody like me, or maybe you think about these descriptions of these entities, these beings, and you go, if I didn't have the connection, as I say, with the teachers, would these sort of energetic beings become part of my sense of awareness or reality? And I'm going to say probably the answer is no. So what's real? That's really a good question. In the scientifically based world, for example, we have certain assumptions about what is real and what's not real that are different than in these cultures. No more right or wrong, as far as I'm concerned, as to, for example, we think atoms are real and molecules are real. We think, that mind is real. We think brain is real. So we're very empiric in this culture, and we say, you can sort of demonstrate or show it. But the biggest mistake probably that the Western ideology has made up to recently is assuming that the self, the ego, is real. In other words, our whole depiction of reality, our whole sense of what holds us together, who are we? So because it's purely objective, we haven't really looked at the subjective reality, and we delegate or relegate external reality, or how we can measure it, to be real and to be tangible. But the internal reality, or the psychological reality, or even you could say the more subjective reality, is relegated to the area of psychology or spirituality. So I think we can imagine a worldview in which these things are not two, we don't live in two different worlds, an outer world that's real and tangible, and an inner world that's subjective. Because how would we know, which is which? Where does one start and the other one stops? Just at the outside of your skin? All of a sudden we're in objective reality now? If you look around your room that you're sitting in, do those chairs and tables have objective reality, but when you look at your mind, it's a purely subjective experience, because it's that mind that's seeing those chairs and those tables? So the notion of taking a lot of security and a lot of fixation in terms of establishing certain things as real and other things as subjective, if you look at it more carefully, it breaks down at a certain point. So what is real, what is not real? What's our view of who we are, what we're made of? Do we exist in a tangible, real way? Is there anything about us that is a kind of fixed, solid reference point from which we can then look at the rest of the world as being real or unreal? So, of course, modern science and the Buddhist point of view have come together over the last, 100 years, 50 years, into the notion that perhaps the entire reality that we're experiencing is subjective, that there is no objective reality. And, of course, friends of mine would cover the entire spectrum of assertion that, of course, the sort of metaphysical reality is real, with all these entities, and on the other side of the spectrum, it's a complete crock of shit, basically. So, as you know, your friend David Nichtern is the middle way school, and whenever we look at a spectrum like that, myself, I like to not get too fixated on either end of it. Okay, it's the metaphysical reality we're describing as solid and real, and you should follow that, and so are you. Or on the other side, it's, you, of course, exist in a solid way, and you make perfect sense, and you're a logical being, and then this whole range of possibilities about what exists outside is, kind of a fiction. What would it be like if we didn't buy into either of those views and looked instead at our actual experience, which is, I think, when you look directly at the experience that you have, there's a couple of things that become more clear about it than we might have thought. One is that it's dynamic, it's fluid, that there's a tremendous charge to it of energy. We're not living in a dead space or a kind of very fixated space, and that it has more than one obvious layer to it or dimension to it. So even if you acknowledge the notion of imagination, for example, what is that dealing with? Are certain things just purely straightforward and they exist and then we imagine the rest of it? Where does a dream come from? What kind of mind is that that's dreaming? Is that during the day we have a solid, rational mind that sees exactly objective reality as it is, and then at night we go cuckoo and start projecting all kinds of beings and energies and entities and traveling around the galaxy, visiting people who are alive and dead? Which one is real? So in the middle way here, in terms of what we've been trying to do, and what I'm hoping to do with our group here, is continue to bring topics out where we can explore these things together and personally contemplate them and feel our world in a more, kind of open, energetic, subjective way. See what we come up with. So I think that's the advantage we have, in a way, of not just buying into a new narrative about the birth of the universe. It's very Buddhist, in a way, to not know, to enter a space of not knowing rather than just, okay, this is this, and this. So what do we discover in that awake but not knowing space? What kind of world do we live? What energies are present? How do you explain your daily reality if you need to or want to? What can you invoke? What can you create? What can you manifest? What forces are at your disposal? What's blocking you? What's obstructing you? So the notion of these deities, these peaceful and wrathful deities, that they serve mankind in a way, or humanity. They're not so much above us as a kind of, we're lowly beings with no cred in the universe, and therefore if we could just pull down some of that energy, we might have something going on. They're part of our makeup. They're part of the environmental makeup. And we can invoke them. This is the real notion here. All these practices that we do are to invoke these energies, bring them into the present. And particularly in the Buddhist context, we're invoking the energy of wakeful mind that is really strongly present in a more powerful way than we're used to going moment by moment, when we're kind of, as we've talked about, daydreaming, sort of in a fog of thick narrative and discursive thought. What is the awake world like? What is the energy of that like? And so we're inviting these entities, these beings, the aspects of our world to kind of help us to wake up. That's really the deal right there. So again, I just want to say that if you're joining us a little late and you didn't hear this announcement, or you haven't been with us before, and you want to participate, because soon we're going to go into discussion and Q&A, can you please go to your browser, open a second window, and in that second window, again, go to facebook.com David Nickturn. And even if you want to start lobbing some comments in now, Michelle Schmalvogel, I hope I'm saying your name right, Michelle, from a hammock in the park in Missouri. I mean, this is just really quite a virtual world we're in. And Julie Bennett Sebastian from Omaha, so Mike Henderson from Nova Scotia, and we'll get into using that forum there in a minute, or 5 minutes or so, to have a discussion. But before we get to that, I thought we'd talk a little bit, now we've entered this world, what are some of these entities and how specific are they? How generic are they, how specific? So interestingly enough, as you get introduced to the pantheon of classic Tibetan Buddhist deities, and particularly protector energies, we can see that really the teacher, the guru, is very much in contact with those forces, you could say. That's one way of looking at it. And so different monasteries in Tibet would have their own protectors, their own deities, energies, and representations of those, and chants to invoke that energy. But I thought I'd give you an example of one that's associated with the Kagyu lineage, which is the four-armed Mahakala, which some of you have probably seen if you've been in the Shambhala shrine room, in the back of the shrine room. In the way it's constructed in the front, you have the lineage figures, whatever representations there are, and then usually somewhere in the back you'd have a protector shrine. So there's a notion of them almost, and you would see them as guardians of temples in Japan, for example. They're protecting the Dharma. That's when we talk about protectors, we're talking about using the word Dharmapala, Dharma protectors of the teachings. And they're fiercely sort of protecting practitioners, the space in which the Dharma is taught and received. And also when you walk in and out of a practice space, there's this notion of you're sort of entering a barrier within which the awakened mind, the quality of awake mind is holding court, you could say, holding forth. So as you make that transition going in art, you might bow and really acknowledge that transition. When you start to practice in a way, you're entering a mandala that's protected by protectors. So the four-armed Mahakala, there's a chant here which I thought I would just read. Many of you will have heard it, but especially for those who haven't, just to get a flavor of what we're talking about tonight in the classical sense. Hum. That's the seed syllable of this protector. In other words, there's a kind of penetrating burst of sound that this protector is associated with. Hum, 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 hum. So that's a kind of seed syllable from which the protector arises. That's a sort of sonic energy from which the protector arises. From glorious Mount Malaya, from the red field in the blood lake Koka, from the charnel ground of Matran Rudra, I invite the great protector. Like a rain cloud adorned with lightning, please enter this place of practice. Samaya Ja. Samaya Ja is sealing that invitation and that of this presence. The Vajra Mahakala is savage and terrifying, holding a hooked knife with your first right hand, holding a skull cup of blood with your first left hand, brandishing a sword with your second right hand, thrusting a katvanga with your second left hand. You, the warrior with a tiger skin round your waist, are surrounded by your retinue with the raven-headed one among them. In accordance with your Vajra oath proclaimed before the great Trungpa, Kunga Namgyal, that's a previous Trungpa Rinpoche, at the hermitage of Dorje Kyungsong, protect the heart teachings of the Kagyu. The evil beings with two tongues who pervert the Dharma and delight in disrupting the teachings, eat them as your food, O Black Protector. By the fierceness of your compassionate wrath, instantly accomplish the karmas of pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and destroying. Lead the faithful holders of the practice lineage to the state of Vajradhara. Om Mahakalya Deva Raksha Samaya Ho Balim Te Kahi. So these chants, for example, if you're in a practice center or at home, are done at dusk. It's interesting. In the morning you do the opening chants. in the early evening you do the protector chants, and in the later evening you sort of acknowledge your connection with the lineage, supplication. So at dusk, this is a perfect thing. It's sort of almost what you think of what happened with Mark Gorman falling asleep. There's a feeling of just being lured to a kind of foggy, sleepy mind. Dusk almost embodies that. You want to take a nap, So right at that time when you're practicing, you would do these chants and sort of invite the wakeful energy to kind of carry you through that sort of interim period. So that's just an example of that, sort of description of a Mahakala energy. And there are many, many more. I was talking to my friend Julia last night, who studies with Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, who's a Dzogchen teacher, and I asked her what protector chants they did, and she said Ekajati was their principal protector, actually protectress, which is interesting because Ekajati is also a protector chant that's done in our tradition, and she's considered the protector of the higher tantras, or the Dzogchen or Ati tantras. So that shows that our lineages are connected in that particular way. What are we to do with all this information? How do we experience this? Well, probably for most of us, we experienced, speaking personally, I experienced these energetics with my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche. He was the Buddha, is the peaceful deities, is Tara, is Avalokiteshvara. He is also Mahakala. He could be fierce and intrusive and provocative. He could be gentle and kind, always in the sort of service of the awakened or enlightened kind of field of energy. So when we start with a certain faith, you could say, in our lineage and our teacher, to just learn these things and repeat them. Gradually, the instruction is that allow yourself to sort of simmer or feel the energy or the energetics of that kind of invocation. And then there's the trickle-down level of how do the protectors manifest in daily life. And he explained, for example, at the level of just us running amok, you could say, with our kleshas, with our aggression, with our confusion, when that happens, there's a natural snapback in the world around us. Everybody's experienced this, where you get immediate messaging. Your karma is immediately messaged saying, you might want to slow down, you might want to chill out, you might want to be more awake. So he used to use the example of, like, you yell at your wife or girlfriend, you're feeling all self-righteous and powerful, you slam the door walking out of the room and slam it on your own finger. That's Mahakala. That is the sort of very earthy dimension of the very sort of ordinary description of how these things work. You get immediate feedback. Now, it is as if you got whacked by one of these beings. They personally intruded in your reality and made you feel something very directly and experienced. Even up to the level, some of us have. It's interesting when somebody has an accident, and you ask them, what was going on in your mind right before that? There's some energy of not having been awake in almost every sort of difficult circumstance or accident that we've experienced. There's something in that's saying, you wake up. You need to pay attention to, like, if you move even without awareness, maybe you pull a muscle or you get a muscle spasm. There's a very literal and direct relationship between our state of mind and the way that the world gives us feedback. Everybody's experienced that one way or another. So in one sense, you could take this as this is just a poetic expression of how we experience that aspect of immediate feedback from the world. And that the world is inviting us, really, once we start taking this on in a kind and gentle way, to wake up, and it's inviting us, once we become practitioners, much more forceful, much more direct. So we're inviting the energy of wakeful mind, into our biosphere, into our way of being, right? So that's when these peaceful and wrathful deities really manifest for us. I think I'll pause there for a minute. I've said quite a lot. While I'm talking in this format, I can't really feel what you're thinking all that well. So let's invite everybody to, if you want to participate now, to again open that second window in your browser. Go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn and go ahead and pop some comments or questions in there, what your experience of these things we're talking about, the protector principle is. It can be from the most mundane level to experiences you had to questions you might have about the whole thing. And we're up for grabs here in the discussion group. So I see that Darcy posted a link to Dorje Denmaling protector. It's hard to make out. It says Emaho, but now let's see who that is. I'm gonna copy that link and go there in a separate window so I don't lose our communication here. But have you all looked at the link that Darcy posted? It's a Halloween. I think it's a pumpkin, so that's really funny. But you can see, actually, it's a kind of good point. It's a sort of culturally a very simple notion of protector, that kind of wrathful energy at Halloween. So that's cute. But let's see if anybody has any kind of questions or comments that you want to share with the rest of us at this point, and I'll try to address some of those. So let's have a look. We have Priya is saying, okay, I have no doubt that these energies are real, that Tara and Mahakala are real, quote unquote. I invoke them both for protection and to be imbued with their energies when I was going through my breast cancer journey over a decade ago. I chanted the green Tara mantra and called upon her for compassion, especially self-compassion, and Mahakala or Kali Ma in the Hindu world for the fierceness I needed to get through that cancer stuff. Beautiful. Okay, so thank you, Priya. That's a very sort of pithy and personal way that somebody is relating to what we're talking about today, and invoking those wrathful energies to have the kind of strength, courage, conviction to work with the difficult and challenging situation. So Rebecca Fantastic D'Onofrio saying, David, what exactly would you say we are being protected from? Okay, good question. My experience with this principle, or how I'm relating to it, has been that whenever I'm drowning in some sort of self-absorption, there would be a sudden shock or jolt back into the present moment, like the bell tower story I recently told you. Yeah, great story, actually. Might be worth sharing. So for me, I experienced it as a protection from some kind of fixation or absorption. Not exactly sure who or what is doing that, if anything at all. But I'm not exactly sure who or what I am anymore these days. So my mind tends to be more open to new possibilities. When I'm not open, that's when those shocks and jolts tend to occur. Could you talk about the Rigden kings of Shambhala as the ultimate Dralas? And the quote that she's referring to is Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Their vast vision lies behind all activities of mankind. An open, unconditioned space of mind itself. In that way, they watch over and protect human affairs, so to speak. Okay, well, that's two very, very different questions. So let's really tackle the first one. The second one's kind of a bigger topic, and maybe we could save that for another time or personal conversation, just so we don't go completely into another whole range of topics. But I go right back to your first question, Rebecca, which is what exactly we're being protected from. Pretty simply, we would say from dazed, confused, ignorant, aggression, where we're lost, really lost in kleshas, what we've defined in the past as kleshas, being too attached to things, being a certain way, being, sort of angry about things being a certain way, and a general stupor or fog in which most of us can, sort of spend a fair amount of our time drifting through kind of huge, thick narratives about who we think we are and what's going on, lost. So that's called ignorance. So there's a natural dynamic for these energies to kind of relate to us when we're in those states. Just as we said at dusk, that kind of like, the sleepy mind, like that. So when we're asleep, it usually has one of those flavors. I've talked about this a million times about the 3 root kleshas of being kind of like, what? Which is one kind of, dullness, Then there's a kind of edgy, sharp quality of like, kind of like separating ourselves from what the experience that we're having in a very sharp, edgy way, which is called aggression. And then there's a kind of, lusting after, clinging to certain dimensions of experience as if they're going to save us from the other 2 things, which is called passion. So that's what we're being protected from. And so that's why these are expressions of Buddha or awakened mind, and they're like poetic expressions of that awakened mind. Just to touch a little bit on the Rigdons, since you brought that up. Rigdons are the legendary or not so legendary kings of Shambhala, but more importantly than who they might have been or are historically, is the quality of mind of the Rigdon is what's called primordial or cosmic mirror. So the idea is that they are able to stabilize or live in a kind of extremely awake, unconditioned realm, unconditioned state of mind that is not stuck at all in those 3 kleshas, at all, completely liberated from that. So they are the kind of human representation of the aspect of Buddhahood or awakened mind at the sort of human realm level. And so they're, in a sense, that aspect of our awareness is what's protecting the entire human race, actually. That kind of quality, intrinsic quality of primordial wakefulness, which is unconditioned. You see, it doesn't have any cause and effect to it at all. So, this is a very poetic way about talking about our potential as human beings, as Rigdon, or as Buddha. That's our sort of full potential being realized by removing the obscurations and purifying the kleshas. So I hope that's helpful. Let's see if anybody else is diving in here. You guys are smart people and creative people, so I know there's going to be some good questions. Again, if you want to jump in now, go ahead and pop a question up for the rest of us to contemplate. Joe is saying, David, could I view Christ or a higher power as a protector? Of course, who am I to say? This is kind of an interesting thing. But from my ordinary perspective, Joe, I would say absolutely. And, it's an interesting thing, and I think some of us know the framework from which you're coming, but the notion of a higher power means we're connected to it in some way. It's not just we're these lowly beings totally separate from the higher power, are we? I mean, we're sort of connecting with that through that kind of language, that kind of view. My short answer would be yes, why not? Why not? It's the energy of awakenment expressed as sort of cutting through, penetrating, saying enough of that, whatever it was that you're doing. And if those energies give you support in that kind of cutting through activity, absolutely true. So, Kathleen is saying, terrific, you'll be here, David. Yeah, I'll explain at the end where I'm going to be, because it's so great to see all of you in person, I got to tell you. It's just, I don't want to put this forum down because it's fantastic, and you're all over the world. But when we do have the chance to study and practice live together, it's unbeatable. Dan Crampton is saying, do these entities provide not just protection, but also power, like the Native American totem figures that can provide, for instance, abilities to heal? Beautifully stated, Dan. And the answer would be yes. They can bring what we would call in the Buddhist world, and probably newer also, siddhis, powers. That's what that literally means. So they can bring out our innate strength. It's not so much that we're being adding something on, but it's the notion of bringing out an inherent strength See, the view of human beings is that we're inherently powerful and wakeful and have tremendous potency. It's not a negative view of humanity at all. This is a very positive view. And of course, in Shambhala, we call that basic goodness, which is a kind of siddhi in itself. Good point, Dan. Well said. Let's see what else anybody's seeing. Again, if you're just late, just open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn. That's where you can, and please also refresh that screen if you're looking at it that way. And that's where you'll see the commentary coming in. And it's time for you guys to chip in here. Beth, okay, Beth is back working on a psychiatric ward. Okay. I get feedback all day long from patients and staff. Every once in a while someone might say to me, focus. And like a gong, I catch myself and come back to what I'm doing. I often get caught up in the chaos. It's a good place for me to practice coming back. Great. Also, by the way, as Priya mentioned, these protectors can be invoked in difficult situations, in ordinary situations in our household. You could have that sort of protector energy. I have an ashe calligraphy that was on the wall here that was done by and given to me by Trungpa Rinpoche, which I consider a sort of protector of my household. Every time I look at that, I remember everything that I was taught, that I'm practicing, that I'm trying to embody. So it could be, any one of these deities at the household level. There are ordinary household protectors, lower down the food chain. So all of these things are ways that we can go about kind of using this reminder. Julie Bennett Sebastian. I work with hospice patients fairly often, usually elderly and many times with dementia that is advanced. There have been many dynamic experiences of patients seeing loved ones to guide them through the journey or death. Is it possible that these are manifestations of the same type of protector deities that you're telling us about? And again, I always like to say, the famous Trungpa Rinpoche quote, your guess is as good as mine. But in this case, my guess would be yes. Any beings that are supportive of us can manifest as protectors in transitory states. Our teachers can definitely manifest as protectors, for example. Probably, if you've made a strong connection to a particular lineage, those entities could be, in a sense, part of your larger environment. But definitely, Julie, that I wouldn't want to say, and I think it's a more complex discussion to talk about where dead people are, in terms of if you can tap, if they hang out in some zone and and they can be channeled through mediums and things like that. That's a different topic and conversation. Probably a juicy one. Again, your guess being as good as mine. But I think this notion that the energy of people who love us, care about us, can be part of the transitional energy. I think that doesn't sound unreasonable to me. But having said that, it's interesting. There was one version of the Dharmapala is the lower down is a Lokapala, which are sort of more situational. And I remember one of the students passing away and Rinpoche saying that he had become a Lokapala. So what does that mean? I mean, most of us were sitting there going like, okay, whatever that means. But the idea of a human being energy becoming sort of a protector. And within our community, there's this notion of kasong, command protector, which is the sort of manifestation of it at a very civilian level of certain people learning this protector principle and sort of taking it on at the community level to help, for example, keep the environment in which the teachings are going on crisp and clean, and if any particular eruptions, neurotic upheavals happen, that they can address that. If somebody comes into the meditation hall with a shotgun, that's the Kasan principle. Say, well, you can't really have that in here, and you can't just unleash your aggression on everybody else and on the Dharma. There's something that's going to meet you there, and they protect the teacher and the teachings, and the whole society, the whole sangha. So there's so many levels to this protection principle. It gets quite involved once we get into it. So we have time for one or two more questions. Neely is saying, a long time ago, maybe 14 years or so, I inherited from a great uncle a picture of one of these protector deities. I think I may have needed that kind of energy, but wasn't sure what sort of deity it was. So this is great to learn about. Okay, Neely, I'm sure you could take a picture of it if you want to, and send it to me. Email it to me at davidnickturn@gmail.com, and we can sort of get, the other thing you could do is just look online, leaf through some of these wrathful deities, and maybe you'll see what it is, like how many arms it has, what ornaments it's holding, what color it is. All those are significant. So that's great. You related to it that way. I think we have time for one more juicy question. So there, I know you guys are still writing in, and sometimes the questions come in even after we finish, just with the time that it takes. And again, in our context, these side conversations are terrific. Some of you communicate with each other. If you see somebody saying something interesting and you want to continue that thread, all you have to do is tap them and just send them a message, and you can have that conversation. So since we started, with Brooklyn, I'm going to give Christy Kravitsky, the Queen of Brooklyn, the very last word to say. Christy is saying, I can think of 2 moments in my life in which I received physical protection from invisible forces during 2 seriously threatening situations. I have wanted to know the who, what, why of those forces were, because I want to understand. I also want to honor them. How to identify who those forces were. Wow. Christy, I think that's probably a conversation that would need a little more detail, and maybe you and I can have it sometime, maybe during one of our Skype sessions, or in person. So, but I think this is the kind of thing we're talking about, where we have a certain aspect of experience, we're trying to give it language, framing, identity. And as I really want to express again that this is an adjunct to the human realm in which we live. In certain cultures, is an important description of a certain area of energy and atmosphere in which the human world unfolds. Different people have had different ways of talking about these things. I myself, just when I just started hearing about different traditions, there was probably the important question we might want to ask ourselves is to what extent we think that these are independent, self-existing energies, which is kind of which is a theistic view that's not really a Buddhist outlook, or just part of the fabric of a kind of more open awareness, and actually part of our own state of being that we can kind of connect with, which is more in the Buddhist way. But we also don't ascribe individual self-existence, independent self-existence, to even our own sense of being an entity. So as a Vajrayana Buddhist, you're living in a very fluid, dynamic, egoless, energetic world. That's called Tantra. And it takes, one of the things that Sakyong Nipam said is that, in the East they have a tantric culture, they have a container for the things we're talking about. We're just right at the beginning of building that here, or creating any kind of infrastructure for that. So that's an astute comment from him, I think worth considering, that we're just really early stages of thinking about how we can frame our world view and the animated dimension of it, the fact that it's alive. Everything's alive, full of energy. We don't live in a dead world. I think that's probably as far as we're going to get tonight. Thank you all for your questions and participation and coming around. I'd like to just mention very briefly that I'm going to be traveling quite a lot this fall and hoping to see some of you in areas where we're going to be. But this very weekend, starting Friday night, Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck workshop for the Albany Shambhala Center. That's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so if any of you are near that area and can come by, I'm sure there's still openings for that program. And we go in depth into the very mundane and powerful aspects of, it'll be sort of different quality than this talk. We're actually going to talk about business and art, creativity, as it relates to our Dharma practice. And then in October, I'm going to be at Metro West Yoga Studio in Massachusetts and Kripalu. And then in November at Wilmington Evolution, that's in Cleveland, Empowered Yoga in Wilmington, doing a meditation teacher training program, the first level of that, mid-November. So these will all be posted on the website and on Facebook. But please come by. I'd love to. The week at Kripalu is the one I'm really sort of most, which is October 19th to 24th. If any of you can come, some of you came last year, we had a really good time. There's a chance to really hang out in a whole different kind of way. Eat great food. It's beautiful up there. You take walks out in the woods together, and do a lot of practice and really look at the whole Buddhist path in a more comprehensive way. Tomorrow, for those of you who are around, I'm going to be at Kaya Yoga, which is in Connecticut, and in the afternoon in the Westport branch of Kaya Yoga, in the evening in the Stamford branch. So let's not forget about that. That's really close by, and that's just a 2-hour workshop in each case. So if you go to Kaya, K-A-I-A, yoga.com, that'll be there. And meanwhile, if you want to get in touch, please do. I'd love to hear from everybody. I do my best to get back to everybody as soon as I can. And we'll be online next week, and the week after we're taking a break, but next week we'll be online, so I'll see everybody next Tuesday night. If you have a great idea for a topic, go ahead and lob it in. davidnickturn@gmail.com is probably the best way to do that. So have a great week, everybody, and as summer turns into fall, see if we can keep our spirits good and up, and all the best.